to discuss the historic progress being made toward enabling the people of Puerto Rico to choose their future status. And when I say very hard work, everybody here has worked hard, diligently, candidly, and honestly to achieve this objective, and I thank all of them. After months of negotiations, the Puerto Rican Status Act represents an effort by the sponsors of several different bills to come together and arrive at a compromise that would be supported by a majority of members. I want to commend our members who have been working on this issue for years. I believe the bill represents what can be achieved when both sides come together, negotiate in good faith, and reach a consensus on an issue that is important to us and to the people of Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rican people do not want to be a colony, and the United States of America does not want to be a colonialist power. This legislation seeks to address that issue. However, it is just the first step in the legislative process. I want to emphasize that. First step. I want to stress that we are sharing the discussion draft today in order to provide transparency and to solicit input from the people of Puerto Rico before conducting a markup or moving legislation to the House floor. The chairman of the committee that has jurisdiction, Mr. Grijalva from Arizona, will be discussing that, I know, as to his intention as to how that will be done. In its broadest terms, the discussion draft embodies a central principle that I will repeat again and again and again. The people of Puerto Rico must decide the future for themselves. Congress has the power and responsibility to initiate and facilitate that process. Most importantly, unlike prior plebiscites, our legislation would implement the will of the clear majority of the Puerto Rican people. Key elements of this compromise to give Puerto Rico self-determination include defining Puerto Rico's non-territorial status options on the ballot, which are independence, sovereignty in free association with the United States of America, or statehood, laying out of the transition and implementation process for each option, providing for an objective, nonpartisan, federally funded voter education campaign leading up to the vote. That has been very important to all the members, and I thank them. And I've been discussing it both with all of these members, how important it was to make sure that the Puerto Rican people understand the consequences of each of the alternatives. We recognize the unique relationship with the United States since 1898. That's why it was important to us to include the provisions supporting Puerto Rico's transition to independence or sovereignty in free association with the United States, should a majority of voters in Puerto Rico choose either of those options. Lastly, the draft legislation tackles some of the hardest questions in order to implement the choice of the voters, including citizenship status, benefits accrued by residents of the territory of Puerto Rico for various U.S. federal programs, including Social Security, as well as travel and work in the United States if Puerto Ricans choose an option other than statehood. Let me say this. In all compromises, not everyone is getting everything they want. That is the definition of compromise. Everyone had to yield on something, and I'm so thankful to our members for their commitment because they felt so important, the reaching of a compromise which would give the citizens of Puerto Rico a choice that then would be implemented, a real choice. This is a compromise with a clear purpose, to give the people of Puerto Rico that choice that I just spoke of. And they deserve to build the future they want. As I've said many times before, I hope they choose statehood. But most importantly, I believe in self-determination for the people of Puerto Rico and all peoples. These decisions are not up to me or to the Congress or other elected officials in Washington. Our responsibility is to offer the people of Puerto Rico a choice, the information they need to make it, and then our commitment to implement, and that's critically important, to implement whatever decision they make. But that decision about their future must be made by them. I look forward to comments about the legislation and working with members to bring this bill to the floor. I would now like to recognize my friend and the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee that has jurisdiction over this issue and who has worked so hard and whose leadership was absolutely critical to get us to this end, the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Raul Grijalva. Raul?
Thank you, sir. Let me thank Steny, his initiation and his office's initiation, his dedication of staff to this has been the impetus for the product that we're talking about today, the discussion draft about Puerto Rican Status Act. Getting to this point has not been an easy process, and we had two pieces of legislation: H.R. 2070, Puerto Rican Self-Determination Act, that Chair Velazquez, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and other members on the committee, like Representative Garcia and others, supported. And we had H.R. 1522, a member of the committee as well, Mr. Soto, Commissioner González-Colón, and Mr. Gallegos that joins us here today as well, that supported that. And the path forward was eventually we're going to reach a point where we had the committee, through the markup process and through the hearing process, is to make a choice that didn't look clear and didn't have the momentum, regardless of what choice we made, to push it forward, either to the entire House or to the Senate. And we knew that. But the passion and the importance of this issue to each individual that was involved in this, and the sponsors of the legislation, I want to thank. Because there's, like I said, not an easy process and has a lot of risk. But at the same time, I think this draft discussion, and that's what it is, let me reemphasize Steny's point. This is a draft discussion, and it's going to be, as of today, already on the committee website, naturalresources.house.gov, on the political status, to immediately begin to receive input and send, and the legislation will be there, but we're going to send it out as well, and begin immediately to receive input from the most impacted people on this issue, and that is the people of the island of Puerto Rico. That's where we're at right now. I think it is progress, it's historic, and the two big differences, I think, in any process, you will notice that current status is not part of a choice. And that is a point of consensus between all the sponsors of any legislation that we're talking about here today. And that point of consensus is this colonized relationship with Puerto Rico needs to end. And what is the step forward? And the choices there is a step forward for the people of Puerto Rico. But we want to make sure it's an informed choice. We want to make sure that people of Puerto Rico have an opportunity to be listened to receive their criticism when necessary, their suggestions as well, and incorporate those questions as we move forward toward the MACA. But the outline, the parameters, and the template for going forward is before us with this draft legislation. Is it perfection? No. Does one side claim victory over another? No. But we do claim a historic step from the House of Representatives to move a piece of legislation to the Senate that begins a process that's binding and democratic. Binding to Congress and fully democratic to the Puerto Rican people. That's what we intended to do. And, this has been an interesting process because as chairman of the committee, the accusation was that I was either sabotaging statehood deliberately and, giving me more credit than I have. And then the other one was that didn't support independence because I was very happy with the present colonial status of Puerto Rico over and over again. Well, that, besides not being true, the process here, I think, showed something. And it showed that the representatives that participated in this took the risk and are forwarding this to the Puerto Rican people for their reaction. It's important and carries a certain amount of courage with it, and I think we should applaud that as well. So with that, let me now have the opportunity to introduce my dear friend, Chairwoman of Small Business Administration, and without it needing to be said, one of the essential advocates in this whole process, and an essential advocate for the people of Puerto Rico and Latino people in general. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I would like to start by recognizing this as an historic opportunity to solve a country's long dilemma. Over 100 years ago, the United States invaded Puerto Rico, and ever since, the issue of Puerto Rico's political status has loomed large. We are here today because we agree we must move towards decolonization. The current status is unsustainable, unfair, and undignified. Solving the Puerto Rican colonial conundrum so far has proven impossible, due in no small measure to a lack of consensus among Puerto Rico's political movements. It is no secret that members of Congress sharing this podium today, myself included, hold opposing views on how to achieve Puerto Rico's decolonization, an issue for which I have fought for decades throughout my tenure in Congress. After decades of gridlock, we have come to recognize that there will be no decolonization for Puerto Rico so as long as we fail to find a common ground. Doing right by Puerto Rico requires that the crossfire comes to an end, and that is precisely what we have done. After continued discussion with Leader Hoyer, Chairman Grijalba, Representatives Soto, Ocasio-Cortez, González-Colón, with whom I held several one-on-one meetings, sometimes hours long, we found common ground. We are sharing the discussion compromise today to get input from the people of Puerto Rico, elected government officials, groups, organizations, and the public before conducting a markup or moving the legislation to the floor. Broadly speaking, the discussion compromise embodies a proposal from Congress to the people of Puerto Rico to make an informed choice on their political future. The people of Puerto Rico must decide their future, and Congress has the responsibility and power to facilitate that process. The negotiations have been difficult, emotional, and at times it seemed that there was no path forward. However, we kept us focused during this process was the desire to bridge our differences so once and for all Puerto Ricans could be provided with a clear and transparent process on the status question. We must contextualize that the status question is bigger than all of us here today and bigger than any political motivations. The status question has affected Puerto Ricans for centuries, first under Spain and then under the United States. And as my fellow Boricuas will tell you, el estatus lo afecta todo. Now, I would like to highlight the provisions included in this draft. The consensus clearly defines Puerto Rico's non-territorial status options: statehood, independence, and free association. It is the first time Congress recognizes free association as a status option, where the American citizenship of Puerto Ricans will be respected. Importantly, provisions on rights to U.S. citizenship are included in both independence and free association options. Second, it provides for an objective, nonpartisan, federally funded voter education campaign leading up to the vote, and it authorizes the necessary funds to carry out a nonpartisan voter education campaign, an initial plebiscite, and if necessary, a runoff plebiscite. This includes describing the transition to an implementation of each status option in sufficient detail for eligible voters in Puerto Rico to make an informed choice. The campaign will also include the discussion of critical matters, such as taxation, commerce, international representation, and citizenship under the three status options. Finally, it will ensure Congress implementation of the option that is chosen by a majority of the eligible voters in Puerto Rico. I would like to first thank Leader Hoyer and his staff for being an honest broker throughout this painstaking process, and also to Chairman Grijalba of the Natural Resources Committee and his staff. And importantly, my deepest gratitude to my staff, current and past, who for the last 30 years have poured their hearts into this issue and without whom I would not be here today. My sincere appreciation goes to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has always been an ally, a key ally, not only on the bill we introduced last year, but throughout this process. Your insights and counsel have been instrumental, along with your pep talks that brought inspiration when I was feeling low. Thank you. I would also like to acknowledge Jenniffer González-Colón for coming to the table and holding one-on-one meetings that were extremely difficult and emotional at times, but fruitful. Look how far we have come. Think about where we were 3 months ago and where we stand today during such a pivotal and historic juncture. When the times come, I will be proud to lead the introduction of this bill with you. Thank you to the constitutional experts that have weighed in without ever knowing all the facts of the negotiation. Vaya mi total agradecimiento al profesor Rafael Cox, Alomar, y la profesora Cristina Ponza Kraus. And finally, to all the diaspora groups who provided invaluable support throughout this process and for their tireless efforts to help us make the transformational change for the people of Puerto Rico. You help us keep moving forward with your remarkable drive and understanding of the importance of this moment. May we take this moment to recognize that as we are experiencing divisiveness and polarization in our daily political discourse, we are here to celebrate that coming to the table and finding a path forward is possible. Let this be a lesson for our colleagues. Thank you de todo corazón. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me introduce the resident commissioner, Jenniffer González, one of the lead sponsors of the Statehood bill, and now the consensus bill.
Thank you, Nidia. I think this is a historic day. I think no one were expecting having Nidia and me together in a podium ever. Even when we've been sharing many other issues like SNAP, like NAP, like Medicaid, Social Security income, and many others. There was always this difference in terms of the status of the island. The difference that many political parties on the island held for many, many years. More than 100 years ago, still, the main issue on the island is the debate on status. So knowing where we're coming and saying, first of all, thank you to our God that allowed us to be standing here and gave us the knowledge and the wisdom to sit on a table, to discuss our views, and to reach an agreement. I want to say thank you to Leader Hoyer, that has been an advocate for allowing the people of Puerto Rico for having a vote. and a main sponsor of HR 1522. Not now, always. Thank you, Leader Hoyer, for being consistent with the option of statehood for the people of Puerto Rico. I want to say thank you as well to Chairman Grijalba for this whole process, to our dear sponsor, Darren Soto. He's a brother from Florida, and always, I don't have a vote here in the House. So if there's somebody in this side of the room that actually represents why the people of Puerto Rico have a lot of inequalities, cannot vote in bills that affect our daily lives, the water we take, the food we eat, the daily issues of the island, it's me. And the people of Puerto Rico voted many times, more than 3 times for statehood. This is a plebiscite after referendum. And I think in multiple occasions, and Congress have never itself resolved the main issue of status. In the last election in 2020, the governor of Puerto Rico, which is here, and I applaud him as a former member of Congress, actually during his time and his tenure, also fighting to get something coming from Congress, are here today because both of us were elected from the people of the island supporting statehood. That was in the platform. Statehood got more votes than the governor and I. That means that people, not only from a local party, but from all parties of the island, support statehood. That's the real consensus. But what happened? It is Congress the one authorized to deal with the issue. And this is the first time ever that we have a binding plebiscite with only non-territorial options. And I will say that for me, that's the most important agreement and consensus in this draft. It's the first time ever in more than 100 years that Congress allow a draft that will self-execute the option decided by the people of Puerto Rico. That non-territorial option, statehood, and 2 kinds of independence. Independence and sovereignty in free association with the United States. And the way it dishonors the mandate of the people of Puerto Rico in favor of statehood, providing a mechanism to achieve it. And I think this is one of the most important issues in this bill. And I think, like Nidia said a few minutes ago, today is a truly historic day for Puerto Rico's future. I know statehood is going to happen. The question always was how long it will take for our generation of Puerto Ricans to actually achieve this. After months of sincere discussions and negotiations, we can proudly announce that we have reached an agreement on a path forward to solve once and for all the island's political status dilemma. And again, it's not perfect. It's not all Nidia wanted. It's not all I wanted. It's not all the governor wanted. But at least I think we need to recognize there's a will. The members that are here to get things done. There's a will to change history. There's a will to allow the people to achieve their full potential. And I do not say this word lightly. Essentially, I stand here with Nidia, as we have always been in opposite sides on this debate. Several of you have covered many of our press conferences in support of statehood. I have long believed that the responsibility to act relies on Congress and as established by the U.S. Constitution. For me, it's personal, because as I just said, I'm the only person here that actually lives on the island and know all those inequalities. And with the governor, I may say the only member. And this Puerto Rico Status Act will authorize a federally sponsored plebiscite among non-territorial status options. And this is, I think, the second greatest achievement of this compromise. We are not doing a makeup to a process. We're talking about real options. Solving the colonial situation of the island. Independence, free association, and statehood. And that this process will be binding as the mechanism that is established to make the transition into and implement the majority of the will of the majority of the voters of the island, I think is the most important thing. I just want to underscore the significance of this proposal. For the first time ever, we will be advancing self-executing vote for non-territorial alternatives. This is a first as well. I think the territorial status constrains the ability of Puerto Rico to prosper. It denies 3.2 million American citizens that live on the island voting representation in Congress, the ability to vote for the commander-in-chief. In other words, we have no say at the national level or federal decision-making process, which impacts every day of our lives. Moreover, as a territory, the federal government can, and often does, treat Puerto Rico unequally on the federal laws and programs that are crucial to combat poverty and promote economic development. The status quo is unsustainable, and until it is addressed, Puerto Rico's economy and social development will be continuing to lag, driving Puerto Ricans to leave our island and search for better opportunities in the mainland like happened during the last 20 years. Today, 43% of island residents live under the poverty level. And while it is true that Congress could pass legislation to fix some of these disparities, it is true also that a future Congress can undo those efforts. And that's because we are a territory, and it will be always at Congress' mercy. And that's the difference with this bill. That's how important it is, and how important it was for me coming along with Nidia to get into a compromise. This is not Jenniffer, this is not Nidia. This is the people of Puerto Rico having the right to deserve a better future. And this is why any effort to permanently resolve political status must be among non-territorial options, because we cannot put the problem again on the table. This bill recognizes and offers the people of Puerto Rico to finally choose within these options. And I want to just say that today is not, again, the bill we ever wanted, but we need to be bigger than ourselves. We need to get things done. And for me, as the first woman representing Puerto Rico in Congress, I think it's important that we all together, all the people who are here today, achieve an agreement. Y en español, breve, este es el momento histórico que el pueblo de Puerto Rico necesitaba escuchar. Por más de 120 años, llevamos siendo una colonia de los Estados Unidos. Por más de 120 años se discute el estatus aquí, cancelándonos unos y otros sin lograr que el Congreso resuelva y por primera vez obligue a que se cumpla el resultado de una votación en la isla. Más de 3 plebiscitos y el people reclamando estadidad. Sin embargo, es el Congreso quien tiene el poder de mantenernos como colonia o buscar opciones descolonizadoras. Este acuerdo al que llegamos hoy, por primera vez, permite un plebiscito vinculante que permita el que se autoejecute una determinación, ya sea a favor de la estadidad, de la independencia o de la independencia en la modalidad de libre asociación. Eso nunca había ocurrido en el Congreso y por eso me siento orgullosa hoy de que este liderato, el líder Hoyer, Grijalva, la congresista Velázquez y todos los que estamos aquí, podamos haber puesto sobre la mesa todas nuestras diferencias, pero buscar un proyecto que permita y viabilice el que los puertorriqueños podamos decidir y que el Congreso respete la voluntad del pueblo de Puerto Rico. Hoy es un día bueno, le doy gracias a Dios y a la Virgen por esta oportunidad y a mi staff que permitió todo esto desde el día 1 y sin los cuales esto no se hubiera logrado. Le agradezco a los veteranos que vinieron de la isla, a los líderes, mujeres, jóvenes, estudiantes y a los múltiples que han dado visitas al Congreso para impulsar esta legislación. To the main sponsors of HR 1522, thank you. Because it's because of that bill that we are actually negotiating this compromise. Thank you to all. Nidia, again, I respect you more. Thank you. And I know that this could be the way for the future. And again, thank you, Leader Hoyer and the Governor of Puerto Rico for actually working this in a team manner. Now, I would like to introduce a brother from the island that represents the state of Florida, our main lead in the HR 1522, and I will say the only member of Congress that is original co-sponsors of all the bills regarding Puerto Rico, thank you, our friend Darren Soto.
Thank you, Commissioner. After 120 years of waiting, today is the day. We finally come together after much negotiation and compromise to give the people of Puerto Rico a chance to end the failed territorial status. The right to this day has been forged by patriotism, sacrifice, and blood by so many Puerto Ricans, including our legendary Bucaneers who came before us. However, it was the pivotal moment of Hurricane Maria, coupled with a limited window to pursue a solution that finally brought us together. Nearly 3,000 Puerto Ricans passing on the island because Puerto Rico doesn't have equal representation or sovereignty on its own. Our legislation will finally provide a binding election, so our brothers and sisters on the island will have a choice between three non-territorial options. The first choice is statehood, the status that I personally support. It will come with equal admission to the Union, with equal rights, equal benefits, and equal representation in this United States Congress. The next choice is independence. It would create the nation of Puerto Rico, sovereign and separate from the United States, with the ability to forge its own future. And the third choice would be independence and free association, otherwise known as sovereignty with free association. It would also create the nation of Puerto Rico with sovereignty and separate from the United States, but also would have a compact. And the United States and Puerto Rico would have a limited relationship that would be defined by negotiations related to areas such as foreign affairs, use of the dollar, citizenship for limited times thereafter. And majority vote prevails, including a runoff. In the compromise, all sides had to give up some meaningful priorities. But all sides had so much to gain in ending the failed territorial status on the island. The country itself, our nation, was created by compromise, from the Declaration of Independence to the United States Constitution and on to this day. Representatives throughout our history have put aside their differences for the greater good, and today marks another major chapter in our nation's storied history. I want to thank Commissioner González-Colón, Representatives Velázquez and Ocasio-Cortez for what was a spirited debate and one that brought the result today, as well as the leadership of Governor Perluisi as well, back on the island, and then of course our leaders, Leader Hoyer and Chair Grijalva, as well as Gallego and others. And we look forward to traveling back to Puerto Rico to hear from the people and working with my colleagues in united fashion to pass this bill out of the House, and we urge our Senate colleagues to do the same. Brevemente en español, nosotros sabemos, después de 120 años y la tragedia de Huracán María, que Puerto Rico no es igual. Y finalmente nosotros necesitamos este momento para tener tres opciones para tener un final de esta cuestión de 120 años. Es importante por nosotros para tener un compromiso y para tener la voto de Puerto Rico para decidir esta pregunta. Y gracias a todos mis colegas por toda su ayuda en este proceso. With that, I'd like to introduce my colleague and fellow Boricua, the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, the young lady from New York, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you, everyone. This truly is a historic day, and I certainly never thought I'd see the day. Es un milagro for sure. We can say that because I think it's fair to say that after so many decades, over a century of disagreement and debate over settling the status of Puerto Rico and within the United States and Boricuas in the United States, we have come to a resolution. And but there was a lot of skepticism at first if this was ever going to happen, because it has not been resolved for over 100 years. But as a Puerto Rican here in the United States, after growing up my entire life, and especially after Maria, seeing my family grow up in poverty, live under blue tarps, be exposed to the ravages of climate change, and also face the injustices of everything from Medicaid to participation in U.S. elections to lack of equal treatment under U.S. law. We are here to finally end second-class citizenship of Puerto Ricans in the United States. And as has been mentioned several times, every party here has made concessions. This is not a place of political agreement on what the outcome should be, but it is a political agreement on process. That we should honor a decolonization process whereby the people of Puerto Rico can elect to choose their status. And it is the first time that we have seen a plebiscite that is binding to the United States, addressing a key issue of the legitimacy of past plebiscites, where the United States was not bound to honor the results, of which the United States was not bound to honor the results. Secondly, we are seeing a plebiscite that equally respects all three non-territorial options. It is not centered on statehood or independence or free association, but it allows Puerto Ricans to equally choose between those three. It is historic in both of those respects. There is accountability to the DOJ over ballot materials to ensure that they are truly impartial, and they allow all Puerto Ricans to participate in that plebiscite. It's historic in that it defines free association here within the bounds of the bill and allows an actual negotiation via treaty with the United States on the conditions of that free association via compact. And again, it allows equal treatment of all three options. And why that is important is because it actually provides a faith in legitimacy of these institutions and these processes, of which there were issues and challenges in the past. And it is my deep, deep hope that this process is conducted, and I know that in this bill allows for that faith in this process, so that the people of Puerto Rico can have full faith and in their participation as such, and that their vote and that their decision will be respected. Ese es un día histórico para nuestra gente y el pueblo de Puerto Rico. Esa es la primera vez en que tenemos una propuesta en que el Estados Unidos tiene que respetar el decisión de una elección de la gente de Puerto Rico. Perdón, I'm getting all nervous. Pero este es un día histórico, porque este también es una elección que va a respetar las tres opciones, que no son, y no tenemos una opción de continuar el estatus colonial de Puerto Rico. Las tres opciones son la estatidad, independencia y libre asociación con los Estados Unidos. Este es un momento histórico y también estamos aquí a resuelva los preguntas sobre el proceso de las elecciones en Puerto Rico. Este es un momento muy histórico y yo quiero también agradecer a todas las personas que están aquí, la congresista Nidia Velázquez, la congresista Jenniffer Colón, Darren Soto, Rubén Gallego, que estaba aquí, representante Hoyer, Leader Hoyer, a mí también el gobierno que está aquí, que estamos aquí con compromiso y también en fe que este va a ser un proceso que respecta la gente de Puerto Rico. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'm sure all of you observed why I'm so proud to have worked with these folks in a very tough challenge. And that is bringing disparate views together to create a compromise which will give the people of Puerto Rico a binding choice not just a plebiscite, not just a focus group, but a choice of their own. And I am very pleased that the governor, who was, through his staff and through his own participation, a critical partner in this negotiation. He has his own views, but his views, as expressed by all who have spoken, was to get to an agreement, a consensus that would provide a document, a process, a way for the people of Puerto Rico to express not our will, but their will, and that will would be carried out. The governor of Puerto Rico, my friend, who was a resident commissioner here, and with whom I worked very closely over all the time of his service, Pedro Pierluisi.
Thank you. As governor of Puerto Rico, I feel proud to be here, and I thank Leader Hoyer for inviting me to be part of this announcement. It is a momentous occasion, and the gist of it is that we are, the members here present, are ensuring that we have full democracy in Puerto Rico. That's what's failing in Puerto Rico. The three non-territorial options that are being presented to the people of Puerto Rico for their blessing are fully democratic. This is all about fixing a problem that is too old. For 124 years, Puerto Rico has been a territory. Ever since 105 years ago, all those born in Puerto Rico are American citizens. Yet, they do not vote for the president of their nation. They do not have voting representation in the Congress of their nation, and they do not participate equally in multiple federal programs. Nobody can deny that the current status of Puerto Rico is undemocratic, and that's why it is not included in this bill. The people will be the ones deciding their future. And for the first time ever, Congress is not simply asking the people of Puerto Rico to express their will. Congress is committing to implementing the will of the majority. Exactly 11, actually, this was 12 years ago. I introduced the bill in this House, H.R. 2499, calling for a multiple option plebiscite in Puerto Rico. It turns out exactly the same day, 1 year later, so this was 11 years ago, there was a hearing held by the committee, the Natural Resources Committee, on that bill. And that bill went on to be approved by this House. So the last time Congress dealt with this issue seriously, and it was this House, it was actually in 2010. And so this was 12 years ago. It is about time we do better. It is about time we solve this political status issue that has been plaguing and affecting Puerto Rico for too long. I have to thank Leader Hoyer for convening the principal sponsors of the two bills pending before this Congress dealing with Puerto Rico's status, actually brokering between them. I also have to thank Leader Hoyer's staff for, drafting the basic framework we're using. And I have to say, I have read this bill rather carefully, and I know that the end result, it is fair, it is reasonable, it is pragmatic, it does what it needs to do. The three options are fairly described in this bill. It is not tilted towards any of the options, in favor of any of the options. The bill also describes fairly and reasonably what's going to happen once a majority of the people of Puerto Rico pick one of the three options. And that is also very important. The bill ensures that there will be voter education, so you'll have an informed vote by the people of Puerto Rico. So, even though it's not perfect, again, it does what it needs to do. I thank and commend Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez. I commend as well Resident Commissioner Jenniffer González, Chairman Grijalva, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congressman Darren Soto, among others who pledged to actually resolve this issue that has been pending for too long. So count on me as the governor of Puerto Rico to help you guide the people of Puerto Rico in this process. So on November 5th, 2023, which I believe is the date, we hold this federally sanctioned plebiscite, and that's going to be the beginning of the end of the current colonial and territorial status of Puerto Rico. I am sure that when the time comes, the majority of the people will ratify their will for equality, the equality that you have here in America from sea to shining sea. But I don't want to affect the tenor and the sentiment involved in this particular announcement that is being made today. The people will speak, and then we'll hit their mandate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. From sea to shining sea and the beautiful blue warm waters of Puerto Rico. The chairman wanted to give a brief addition to his remarks about the schedule.
Just an announcement, Mr. Hoyer. I mentioned that the input, as we send it out, is already in the committee, and we welcome that input and to be cataloged and to be presented to everyone. And the other part is, this process now is an important process. It's no longer about blame as to why something is not getting done. It is now about informing and educating and motivating the people of Puerto Rico to make a choice of these three options. That's where we're at. And I want to thank everybody for that effort. I want to thank Margarita Varela, Luis Urbina, and the other committee staff, and Brian for the time that they have put into this very important issue. And Mr. Hoyer, thank you for getting us to this point. And now I think we move forward. And we're going to be in Puerto Rico to listen to stakeholders, to listen to elected officials, and that is a commitment we made in terms of transparency, and have the draft discussion item out there for people to be able to react to it and to have an opinion on it. So thank you very much. And Mr. Hoyer, again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.